The snare drum is possible the second most important element of a kit. In order for us to pick up the correct sound of a snare drum, we generally use two microphones. A microphone that is capable of picking up all the bottom end and the attack and the roundness of this instrument, which is also our top snare microphone. And to do this, we use an MD441 Sennheiser and a bottom snare microphone, which is going to pick up only the brightness of the snare. The snare drum generally has a lot of iron web underneath it, which creates a lot of hyper accentuation on the brightness of this instrument, and especially brings up a lot of the ghost note that the drummer does. What I want to do is to let you hear first the overall drum kit, and then I want to solo for you the snare drum to let you truly hear that the size, the width, the weight, and the depth of a kit is not given from a proximity microphones, or in this case the snare drum microphones. Proximity microphones are generally used only to increase a little bit more the intelligibility of the specific instrument within the mix by raising the volume. And by doing this, what I would do is to increase a little bit more the attack of the instruments. So generally, the way you should look at recording an instrument, no matter if it's a drum kit or any type of instrument, is like recording an ensemble, like recording an orchestra. You know, the beauty of the orchestra is that the sound of the orchestra is made up by the room microphones. You know, close proximity microphones to each single section of an orchestra are only helping the mixer to bring up specific section when needed to be brought up within the mix. But the sound comes from the direct sounds reflecting on the surfaces of the room which is recorded, and then the blend in of the reflection plus direct sound generates this bombasticness and this epic sound of an orchestra. And the exact same thing happens for our drums. Maybe bombasticness isn't the right term to use for an orchestra, but perhaps for a drum kit, that's exactly what we're looking for. So right now I'm gonna let you hear the overall drum kit and listen how big and powerful the drum kit is, and then I will solo up the snare drum to truly let you hear the size of this of what proximity microphone could actually pick up out of an instrument. So as you can hear, once I soloed the closed microphones, right now we have kind of lost all that, you know, epic sound, all that width that the drums is creating, and that's because we're picking that up through ambience microphones, which are going to describe a little bit better the size of the kit, but more precisely the size in which the kit has been recorded. So I'm gonna move closer to our snare and hat to show you one little thing. So let me close this plugin and fast forward a little bit. So what I want you to pay attention is the position of the top snare microphone. Again, we use a Sennheiser MD441. Reason being is that the MD441 has a super cardioid polar pattern. So what I'm doing it is starting with a microphone and playing with the null point of the microphone. So I'm having it placed in a way that the null point of this microphone are nonetheless working as attenuator of the surrounding areas of the microphones, pretty much on the sides and on the back of the microphone, a little bit before the back because this is a super cardioid. The null point are exponentially decreasing the amount of bleeding I would get from the adjacent instruments. As you can see over here, we have the hi-hat, which is right next to the snare drum, and then we have the rest of the kit that would be greatly picked up by the microphone if the drummer does a fill, which in fact it will. So what I'm doing here, I'm using a microphone that has already a polar pattern that will help me out not only to focus greatly on what the microphone is aiming, but also with the null point rejecting as much as it can the adjacent instrument. So in other words, I don't have to use a gate after all. I don't have to reduce the sound by writing some crazy automation. The key here is really truly choosing the right microphone, not only for the frequency response that will help us out to bring up a little bit more of the tone of an instrument, but picking up especially a microphone based on the rejection points and the null point, because those are actually a Swiss Army knife that will help us they will do the job for us by, again, attenuating the surrounding areas that we don't want to bring up within the mix. So I'm gonna let you hear right now only the snare top, which should be very round and should describe a little bit more the tone of the instrument. And what I want you to focus is on how detailed this microphone is in picking up only what is pointing at, which in this case is pointing right at the center of the snare drum. And again, what I want you to notice is that unfortunately, whether we like it or not, we always need to figure it out a solution on where to place this microphone, which is most of the times in a very unfortunate place, because it's of course between very loud instruments, and it needs to be positioned in a way that would allow the drummer to do his job without avoiding the fact of being hit. So we carefully position this microphone to pick up, first of all, the tone of the snare drum. So as you can see, the microphone is slightly tilted down 45 degrees. So with this, we're pointing straight at the center of the snare drum, where we actually were lucky enough to play with a very consistent drummer. So we picked up a lot of the hits were very precise, always at the center of the snare drum. And then I'm using the supercardioid pattern to pretty much attenuate all the sides or the surrounding areas of this microphone. I'm gonna again let you hear to the difference and focus on how little bit of the hi-hat and the surround instruments get picked up by this microphone. I mean, if you notice, a hi-hat is right next to the snare drum. I mean, the drummer is bashing on the hi-hat non-stop, and yet it feels like the hi-hat has been recorded 3 rooms away from the snare drum. So this already should give you an intel of how important it is not only to choose the right microphone, but position it properly. To not only use the coloration of the microphone to bring up the tone of an instrument, but to use the null point of the microphone in order for you to have it doing the job for you. Again, I'm gonna let you hear the snare drum and take always a look at where the hi-hat is and try to listen carefully of a little bit of a bleed feeds within this microphone. I'm gonna let you hear it in conjunction with the overall kit. It feels extremely natural. Of course, it doesn't give us a lot of information about the size of the kit. And that's because, again, the way you should look at proximity effect and close miking is the same way as you would listen to me speaking in a room. When you will listen to me speaking in a room, what you hear is my direct voice plus the combination of early and late reflection that happens within the room. And it would be completely different if I would come right next to your ear and start talking. Other than being very creepy, my voice, the timbre of my voice would sound completely different. So the same things applies for microphones. The closer we bring them to a source, the more we accentuate the proximity effect. So we bring up a lot of low end, a lot of attack, but not a lot of definition or size. If we move to the opposite side of our snare drum, I'm gonna let you hear the sound of the bottom snare microphone. The bottom snare microphone now is being placed in order for us to pick up all the ghost notes. The ghost notes are all those intermediate notes that he does between each hit. So all those ghost notes are not picked up greatly with the snare top microphone, but we use especially the bottom snare microphone in order for us to bring up a little bit more clarity of the sounds. And also, since there is this iron web we bring up all the ghost notes because the webs start vibrating every time the drummer hits the snare drum. So I'm gonna let you hear the bottom snare mic. So to give you a little bit of an intel where the snare microphone is positioned, I'm gonna let you see it. The snare microphone is positioned right underneath the snare. It's tilted a little bit off axis in order for us to use the rejection pattern of the microphone we use. If for this specific case we use an SM57. First, we use the 57 because of its frequency response. The 57 has a very crisp and bright mid-range frequency response. And second of all, I'm using a 57 because I still want to try to get a little bit of the attack and the punch of the snare drum. And I'm using the null point of the 57, which is pointed straight at the kick drum, in order for us to pretty much cut down and to trim out all the bleeding from the kick drum. I'm gonna let you see where the microphone is positioned and try to see if you can pick up any of the kick drum sounds. So the microphone is here, very close to the kick drum, but yet we use a specific type of microphone with a specific rejection pattern. So we use a cardioid pattern in order for us to cancel out all the bleeding that would come from the kick drum. I'm gonna let you hear both of the snare drum playing together. What I'll do right now is, as before, making sure both of the snare drums are in phase one with another. We did this already prior to recording. So we flipped the phase button on the preamplifier we'd use to record the snare bottom, and hearing if the actual sound of the snare was getting thinner, or actually we're gaining a little bit of low end. So technically right now, by dragging my trim tool or trim plugin over here and flipping the phase, we should hear the sound getting very thin in order for us to bring the signal out of phase. So right now the two snares are at unity. I'm gonna let them play together, and then I'm going to bypass this plugin, and what I want you to notice again is focusing on the low end of this instrument. So by unchecking the bypass button on our plugin, we should start losing a lot of the low end and the tone of the snare microphone. Okay, I'm gonna give it a shot. You hear that? So right now, again, we did our homework prior to press record. So we flipped the phase. I asked the drummer to play, to give me a couple of hits, and I would like check and uncheck the phase button. So I will invert the polarity. So right now we don't need to invert any polarity. What I'll do though is to start now balancing the two instruments in order for me to create the sound of my snare drum. Again, two different microphones, two different pickup patterns, two different frequency response that would fit two different preamplifiers. So the only thing I could do, instead of reaching for an equalizer, is to blend in how much of low end versus brightness I want within these two microphones. And I'll do this by starting with the snare top microphone, and then I will also uncheck the kick drum because I want to see the relationship between closed microphone with the kick and closed microphone with the snare drum before I start building up the rest of the kit. I'm gonna start bringing up the snare bottom just to bring up a little bit more of the clarity of our snare. All right, so right now I've kind of create a balance where I'm starting to like a lot the sound of the snare. I'm going to compare this with the sound of my sub kick and kick inside to see where both of them are. Alright, I'm starting to like them a lot. What I'll do is just to mute the sub kick and the snare bottom, as I'm going to use them to truly let you hear the difference that a recording would do if we remove the extremely low end from the kick drum and the brightness from the snare drum by muting the bottom snare microphone. So right now I'm gonna A and B with and without the sub kick and the snare bottom. Listen to the difference. Night and day. So as you can see right now, the combination of closed microphones plus we started to use other types of microphone will already give us a pretty definite equalization for our drum kit. So right now, we don't need to reach out for a gain processor such an equalizer in order for us to brighten up or darken up a specific instrument. We have it right here. We already used it. Microphones are nonetheless equalizers, and again, the signal flow we choose of where to feed the microphone already is shaping the sound in a way that is doing the job for us. So the only thing we need to really pay attention is to listen prior to recording something. Next in line is the hi-hat, which I'm going to analyze in a few seconds. So give it a listen to only the closed microphones, kick, sub kick, snare, and snare bottom, and then I'm gonna let you hear the overall sound of the kit. So again, with these two microphones, we have a lot of definition, a lot of punch, a lot of attack. Not a lot of description of the width of the size of the kit. What I'll do right now is letting you hear first the closed microphones, and then I will unsolo them and let you hear them in context with all the other microphones. Again, bear in mind that everything else right now is at unity, so it might be a little bit overkilling the sounds of these particular microphones. So I hope you could hear the difference and the enormous difference that closed microphones do versus ambience microphone. And I hope now you have a greater understanding of how proximity microphones works based on the frequency response that each single microphone has it. Next in line is the hi-hat and then the rest of the kit.